Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fourth and final panel of RSK's COP27 event, The Road to the UAE. I'm Walid Alskaf. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Rebalancers, and I'll be chairing today's discussions. So a quick intro on myself. I have a background in building innovative startups, mainly within the tech and in the blockchain space. My current startup is called Rebalancers, which aims to monetize the ecosystem services provided by keystone species such as forest elephants, orangutans, the great whales, tigers, to help fight climate change, protect biodiversity, and to support human welfare all around the world. So today we're here to look ahead to COP28 and the role of climate action in the UAE and wider Middle East region on the global stage. From doubling renewable energy generation to rapid investments in nature-based solutions to climate impacts, the region is stepping up to the helm. But before we start, a note on social media and housekeeping. So we'd love for you to share the event, and if you do, please use the tag @RSK Group and use the hashtag #ActOnESG. On Instagram, it's @the RSK Group. On LinkedIn, it's RSK Group. On Facebook, it's RSK Group. And on Twitter, I'm sure you've guessed it, it's @RSK Group. All attendees' microphones are automatically muted throughout the webinar. And during the first 3 slides, introductions, you can pose questions and there will be a Q&A session. You can, of course, raise questions throughout the discussions. But please bear in mind, as many questions as possible will be answered, and apologies in advance if we don't make it to your question. We will try to get through as many as we can. Shortly after the webinar, you will receive a link to a short survey. If you could take a few minutes to provide feedback, please do so, and so we can improve on future webinars. I'd like to invite all my panelists to please turn on your cameras and mics. I'm joined today by 4 experts who will share their thoughts on how the UAE and wider Middle East region are stepping up to the helm of sustainability and what lies ahead as we get closer to COP28 next year. So first off, I'm delighted to have Cindy Toulon, Environmental Advisor at the RSK Middle East. Cindy, could you say a quick few words on yourself?
Thank you. Great to be here. I'm Cindy Toulon, and I've been working in the energy industry for 27 years, starting in Canada, and the last 18 years in the Middle East. So as you can imagine, I've seen some changes, both in the industry, but also on how environmental and social impacts are managed, which is the area that I mostly work in. The focus used to be more on the environmental impacts, which are no less important, especially where there's climate impacts, but we've seen a shift where the social impacts are more of a significant focus. And we're seeing tangible climate change impacts on the ground, especially in areas in the Middle East like Iraq, where there's traditional resource-based livelihoods that are intermixed with a really extensive energy industry. So we're really looking forward to seeing how COP27 and COP28 will apply in the Middle East. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Cindy. So next, we have Antonios Voulodis, Director of Sustainability and Stewardship at NYU Abu Dhabi. Over to you, Antonios.
Hello, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the invite today. My name is Antonios Voulodis, and I'm the Director of Sustainability and Stewardship at NYU Abu Dhabi. I have joined NYU Abu Dhabi for the past, since March 2021, and I'm the inaugural director at NYU. I've been in Abu Dhabi for approximately, well, more than 12 years now, with experience in the private sector, but also the government of Abu Dhabi, working for the Estidama program for almost actually 6 years. I'm a civil engineer and I have a master's in renewable energy systems. I'm delighted to be here in this terrific panel, and I'm very excited to participate. So thanks very much for the invite.
Thank you, Antonios. So next up, we're joined by Abdul Rahman Yayaye, Chief Executive Officer of the Oman Society for Petroleum Services, also known as OPEL. Over to you, Abdul Rahman.
Thank you, Walid, for inviting me to participate in this panel. I'm 20+ experienced energy professional of business, marketing, planning, finance, business development experience across the full value chain of oil and gas industry. I have been moving really from upstream to midstream and downstream. I moved also. I worked for a number of international and local organizations. So I worked for Schlumberger, and then I worked for Oman LNG. Then I moved to work for Occidental Petroleum Corporation prior joining OPAL. Thank you.
Thank you. Finally, we are joined by Dr. Tom Headley, Senior Technical Advisor for Nature-Based Solutions at Bauer Resources. Over to you, Tom.
Thank you, and greetings, everybody. As Waleed mentioned, I'm a Senior Technical Advisor specialized in nature-based solutions with Bauer Resources, who are a leader in implementation and development of sustainable water and wastewater management systems throughout the Middle East. I personally have more than 25 years experience in that space of nature-based solutions and constructed wetlands, and have been working across the Middle East region from Oman and next door the UAE, right across to the other side towards the Jordan River Valley over the past 15 years, developing sustainable solutions for water and wastewater management. So it's a pleasure and an honor to be talking on these important topics today.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Tom. So for the first question, which I'd like to ask to the panel, it is, the United Arab Emirates is home to the world's largest solar plant, the Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum Solar Park, and Mark Kinber, the chief executive of the climate group, said that the UAE was recognized as the world leader in renewable energy. How else is the UAE and the Middle East stepping up to the helm of climate action and sustainability? Cindy, would you do us the honors and open up with your views on that question?
Sure, thank you. So having been in Dubai for so long, I can definitely see where the UAE has been a leader in this field. Certainly we have the sun, but what I see is that the UAE is stepping up on a global scale. And initiatives like the Net Zero by 2050 strategic initiative, one of the first across the Middle East, it recognizes that emerging economies and the developing nations are part of that solution. So getting that climate financing and that funding out there is really so important. And then another quick one is that the UAE is committed to investments in climate smart agriculture and food systems. And they have the National Food Security Strategy for 2051. And this will look at achieving zero hunger. And the strategy is specifically aimed to implement resilient agricultural practice. So the climate finance and the water security sessions earlier today also both touched on this, on the importance of these types of solutions in agriculture.
Thank you, Cindy. Abdul Rahman, would you like to have a go at this question?
Sure. I think UAE is playing really an pivotal role towards zero emission, not only in UAE, but I think UAE is playing important role globally through their investments arm, whether it's Mubadala Energy, Masdar, or even ADNOC. Their investments on new technologies, on improving efficiencies, on wind and solar power, and of course on whether it's blue or green hydrogen or green ammonia or green steel and so on. They are really playing an important role towards achieving the goal of zero emission by 2050. And similarly, we have seen similar commitments. Recently, Oman have committed to zero emission by 2050, which is, I think, a very important, move by Oman, especially its geographical location and its, I mean, location in terms of also availability of solar and wind make Oman as one of the attractive places for foreign investments to produce green hydrogen. Oman has also integrated a couple of weeks ago a newly established company, Oman, or they call it Hydrom, or Oman Hydrogen. And also they started, or they kick off the bidding process of 2 concession areas to produce green hydrogen. They have also announced about a number of locations to produce electricity via wind and solar as well. Saudi, I think also they have started this a bit early, as well, and they have started producing, green hydrogen, and they have collaboration with a number of international, companies to produce green hydrogen. So at the end of the day, the world population is increasing, and I think we will reach by 2050 about 9 billion people in the world, and the world would require additional 30% of new, whether it's from the hydrocarbon or from the new energies, and again to reach the zero emission or net zero, I think all stakeholders needs to play a role, including individuals. Improving efficiencies is really probably the easy part that we should really work on to reduce the CO2 emission.
Thank you, Abdulrahman. And from your perspective, Antonios, I mean, we've heard some very exciting announcements Abdulrahman shared with us, but also some of the challenges. What are your views on this?
Right, and I echo everything that Cindy and Abdulrahman mentioned, especially on the part that the UAE has ramped up action, and since last year we have the UAE net zero announcement, which is a very inspiring, also, if you will, announcement, especially for a country that its economy is based on fossil fuels, but nonetheless showcases leadership's commitment towards diversifying the economy, but also ensuring that action is taken to avoid or mitigate the impacts of climate action or climate change. And it's important as well to note that it's not only the UAE. Abdulrahman mentioned Oman, Saudi also, and Bahrain have embarked into a similar journey to a net zero by 2060, which are also very, very important commitments to see the region coming together and ramping up action. And also yesterday, some very positive news that came from ADIPEC, which was the signature of a $100 billion US dollars deal between the US and the UAE country on renewable and clean energy projects across the globe. I would say these are exactly the news that we should be hearing, and this is again a commitment from our leaders here in the UAE to ramp up action. And it's really positive in the right direction. So personally, I'm a very optimistic person by nature, but also I'm very optimistic that we have the tools in our hands to achieve the 1.5 degrees target of the Paris Agreement. And I believe over the coming years, we'll see more and more coming from various governments across the world, of course, including the Middle East as we speak.
Thank you, Antonios. Now, Tom, we've heard from your fellow panelists, some exciting solutions, but it seems that nature-based solutions has not quite been mentioned. And as our nature expert, I'm going to invite you to share your views in terms of what role does nature-based solutions and sustainable urban development can play, and how does this look like across the UAE, please?
Yeah, good question, and I think it's important. I'd like to make the connection here between the UAE and the broader Middle East regions. The connection, the close coupling of water resources and climate impacts or climate change and energy use in what we call the water energy nexus. So the UAE is one of the most water scarce countries in the world, and it's also has a growing population, which will continue to consume more water into the future. And in the arid Middle East, water and energy are inherently intertwined together because most of the access to freshwater resources in the UAE, that equates to desalination of seawater, typically, which also translates directly at this point in time to consumption of electricity to produce that fresh water. And it's probably interesting to highlight that 10 to 20% of the UAE's electricity consumption is used for just desalinating seawater and pumping water around and distributing water. So it's actually quite a significant player in the whole electricity consumption, and therefore in the broader context of carbon emissions in how we go about that. So, and there's if you drive around the UAE and the region, you'll notice that next to every desalination plant's located right next door to a power plant for these very reasons, that they consume a lot of energy. So one simple solution, getting back to nature-based solutions, and that the question, simple sort of almost low-hanging fruit in achieving improvements in efficiency in that space, which is gaining a lot of traction, especially in the last few years in the UAE, is actually just looking at the use of nature-based solutions like constructed wetlands as an energy efficient way of treating wastewater, and doing that in a decentralized way. So treating wastewater close to the source amongst neighborhoods or in cluster-based sort of decentralized treatment systems in an energy efficient way. So reducing electricity that's used for pumping wastewater to large central treatment plants, which use a lot of electricity to treat wastewater, and then pumping that recycled water kilometers back to where it's needed for irrigation. Instead of doing that, which in itself actually, the use of recycled water from treated sewage for landscape irrigation, which is a heavy consumer of freshwater resources in the UAE. If you look at the energy requirement, it's about 10% of the energy to produce 1 litre of water by treating sewage, which has already been desalinated once, if you think about it, before we use it, compared to desalinating seawater. So sending it in a conventional approach, it's already, and treating sewage and reusing that is already saving, it's at 10% of the power consumption. If we use nature-based solutions, constructed wetlands, in a more decentralized way, treating that wastewater closer to the source, minimizing pumping of water back and forwards, and minimizing the energy that's used in treating wastewater, then that comes down to about 1% of the energy consumption to produce a litre of fresh water that can be then reused for irrigating landscapes, which is an important consideration if you've spent time in the UAE or if you're a resident there, in terms of quality of life and making the landscape green and livable in this large cities in the region. So I think it's actually I would say there's a race in the region to become the leader in this space of nature-based solutions and adopting and implementing this sort of exciting technologies, with Oman probably in the last 10 years leading the way over that time with some very large and innovative applications of constructed wetlands and so on. But what I've seen in the last couple of years, the UAE really, and I think on the back of COP28 being on the horizon, that sort of is really motivating a lot of companies and agencies and governments to really start to actually put these things into action and become a leader in itself. I think in the next few years, we'll see a lot of progress in that space.
Great. Now, thank you for that, Tom. And I'm going to come back to a point you're making, and I'm bring a little bit of controversy just for the fun of it. As you know, there's a big push around the world to go for electrical cars. And if you buy, let's say, a Tesla in Norway, and you will get most of the time electricity from renewable sources of energy. So your Tesla is fed clean energy. If you buy a Tesla, for example, in Poland, you're highly likely to get electricity coming from coal power plants. So it negates the impact that an electric car could have to, if you want, fight climate change. Aren't we seeing the same thing here with regards to the UAE, where you're pushing for nature-based solutions, but instead of feeding it, if you want, water from a clean energy source, you're using the carbon for the Polish analogy example? Isn't there a problem here? How can we move towards having water coming from renewable energy instead of oil energy?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I guess that's the ultimate goal. And you know, some of these things have to happen step by step as well, and that's why I mentioned the low-hanging fruit in a sense that improving efficiency of how we use electricity and energy and fossil fuels, for that matter, in the current situation where we are now is what I would say the low-hanging fruit, the easily achievable goals to buy us time to reduce emissions, reduce that. I mean, by using the fact of using nature-based systems to treat sewage, for example, is you're essentially using the power of Mother Nature to do the job for you rather than electricity and chemicals and electromechanical equipment and so on. So you can actually achieve the same outcome in terms of treating contaminated water without using electricity if we do it just a little bit, you know, smartly and cleverly. So that's already a net gain, but then I guess it's a useful stepping stone towards buying time to then make these broader shifts towards more renewable energy sources throughout the region, or buy a bicycle for your electric car analogy.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. So Antonio, the UAE has recently updated its nationally determined contribution, also known as NDCs, and is setting a more ambitious target for curbing carbon emissions by 31% by 2030, up from its previous 23.5% target. How is this being delivered on the ground?
Right, and thanks for your question, Walid. It's again, going back to the point I was trying to make before, again, it's one of those, if you will, commitments of leadership towards ramping action. And sometimes we do realize that 2050 might be far away, and we need more action, you know, in the immediate term. And we've been reading, you know, those numbers from the IPCC report, for example, that mentioned that we have, for example, to peak our emissions very soon by 2025, and then reduce them by 50%. So those kinds of commitments and those kinds of increases, especially again from countries like the UAE that host the COP28 and they're trying to lead that space, are very important. They're delivered, and primarily they go back to, especially for that 30%, majority of it, or 2/3 of it, will come from the investment, if you will, to increase nuclear and solar, or to clean the energy grid and the power grid in the UAE. Interestingly, we're reading in the report that 5% also will come from carbon capture and storage technologies, which we can see that, you know, especially the UAE, are gaining pace, if you will, over time. I'd like also, yeah, and going back to some of the points that Tom made, especially on the energy efficiency side, and you know, Tom touched base in so many topics that they are very dear to me. I think it's really important, and the country is also realizing that we need to be more efficient, whether it's on desalination, whether it's in the way, again, we produce water, whether, for example, in our buildings, or the way we operate our buildings. And I was working in the Estidama department for 5 years, and we did a quick analysis back in the day where we realized that approximately 20% of the gross floor area across the Emirate is certified under the back then newly established Estidama rating system. So those buildings are sustainable. What do you do with the rest of the 80%? What happens with all those buildings from the 80s, from the 90s, that they leak energy, right? And so on. So I see more and more, especially from the government side, with super ESCOs like the Abu Dhabi Energy Services Company, established back in 2020, with big budgets coming to fill that gap, but also in Dubai with the likes of the Etihad ESCOs. And this is exactly where we need to invest more. I mean, I'll stop there. The Department of Energy has a big demand side management initiative looking into and compiling all these different initiatives, whether the nature-based solutions that Tom is speaking about, or increased efficiencies, again, in the way we produce electricity or water, but also in the way we consume. And this is also very, very key towards net zero, and towards, again, also speaking about Abdulrahman's point before, we all need to make a difference, and we have a role to play. And this also goes back to the individuals and the way we perform our everyday lives. I'll stop there. I could keep talking forever. These are subjects that really trigger me, but I'm going to stop.
Brilliant, brilliant. Abdulrahman, so from your perspective, what are some of the exciting initiatives that are being done, even from an Oman perspective, and the UAE in a broader sense, in terms of curbing carbon emissions that you find particularly interesting?
Yeah, well, in almost a month ago, Oman Vision 2040 implementation follow-up office have conducted a 2 weeks carbon lab. They call it carbon lab. So people, subject matter experts from all sectors came together. I think total participation of over 200 subject matter experts from logistics sector, from mining, from oil and gas, from transportation. They came together, and from Environment Authority, they come together and they analyze how Oman can reach to zero emission by 2050. So, at the end of the day, it's a contribution from each sector, and we have to balance between what we are suggesting and what we are putting in our strategies. So, everything has to be, as suggested by some of my colleagues here, gradually. We cannot just shut down the oil and gas production and we go straight to the zero emission. We have to have a plan. And I think we have now a concrete plan in Oman. Each sector knows how much they are going to contribute to reach to zero emission. We understand what exactly we need to do to, in terms of infrastructure for transportation, for example, in order to achieve that goal by 2050. Also the energy sector, I mean, the oil producing companies have now their plans on how to reach that target in terms of introducing, whether introducing new technology, reducing flaring, for example, of gas. Of course, the green hydrogen part is one of the main components, and Oman officially announced that they will be producing about 1 million ton of green hydrogen by 2050. And the whole world estimated to produce about 200 million. So we are just, we know how much capacity we have, and we are targeting about 1 million ton by 2050, which will entail around 130 billion investments. At the same time, in order for us to make this happen, we have to build capabilities, and we have to build human resources to cope with the objectives we would like to achieve. And therefore, my organization, the organization I work for, we are currently in the process of, we have national occupational standards, for electrical, mechanical, HSC, maintenance and fabrication, and so on. We are currently in the process of expanding our national occupational standards, which are really important to develop any human capital, required to cope with those investments. We expand our noses to include alternative energies. Again, a lot of people, as we move from hydrocarbon to alternative or new energies, will definitely need to play an important role collectively, whether it's a governments, NOCs, or private sector. We need to really work together to upskill the current resources to meet the future demand of the new energies in the future.
Great. No, thank you very much for that, Abdul Rahman. I just want to move now to a slightly different question, more around how climate change has been impacting the UAE. So, for example, one of these impacts is that rainfall is sparse and inconsistent, averaging between 140 to 200 millimeters every year. How is this region addressing water security? And I'd like to invite Cindy to give your views on that question, please.
Sure, thank you. I do a lot of work in Iraq. That's actually where most of my project work is. And so this is definitely something that's seen there. Obviously, the rainfall is across the region, not just Iraq, but in some countries, and in Iraq especially, they actually have a double whammy where they're battling both the water quantity and the water quality. So there's been a major reduction in water flows into Iraq from neighboring countries, and then the water that's left behind is subject to pollution from various sources. And then the water infrastructure is degraded, it needs repair, but there seems to be a lot of difficulties getting the required climate finance and expertise to where it needs to be. So there's people on the ground that are actually really trying to use this water. Farmers, for example, as you can imagine, their own struggles there. But this has had impacts all through the country, and media last year, and many years actually, has reports of many illnesses from the poor water supplies, and many people hospitalized. Like 118,000 in 2021 were hospitalized because of water problems in the summer. And of course, in a place like Iraq, many people were also suffering at home that didn't make it to hospitals. So water security really is a struggle. And the earlier sessions today talked about how this is a challenge in many places. It's such a critical resource, but getting it to the people is really the major hurdle. And I think it was Mark Smith said earlier today that the climate crisis is really a water crisis, and that there's a lot of linkages there. So it's a very big part of the equation for sure.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Cindy. Now, Tom, water security is an issue, but so is the rising sea levels. How is the region dealing with both of these challenges?
Yeah, that's a very excellent point, and I think it's very pertinent to the UAE, who are actually extremely vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, including sea level rise, with I think there's about 85% of the population of the UAE live within 7 meters elevation of the sea level, and the majority is close to the coast. So there's if anyone in the world, apart from some Pacific Island nations and so on, sort of have a vested interest in actually taking action on climate change, then it's countries like the UAE that need to lead the way. And so nature-based solutions in particular can play an important role in at least in mitigating some of these impacts of sea level rise, and I guess improving resilience, which is part of the challenge that we all face in trying to reverse some of these impacts. So things like mangrove restoring, planting, recreating mangrove forests along the coastlines is a critical step, and that's the UAE in particular. I would say, I mean, Abu Dhabi really should be just one big mangrove swamp. Traditionally, if you look at it as a natural landscape, an ecosystem, it's just mangrove heaven in a way. But there's been this, as Abu Dhabi as a city has developed, and the region, there's this this friction and conflict between urban development and reclamation, as we call it, of basically converting mangroves into developed land and putting buildings and cities on there. But that's slowly starting to turn around, and we're seeing the value and recognizing the value in mangrove ecosystems in terms of sea level rise, mitigating the impacts of coastal erosion, stabilizing the coastline, because what comes with with climate change will be also more severe storm events and storm surges, inundating those coastal areas. So mangrove forests play, and we see that in the Florida and the southern states of the US in hurricane season, time and time again. Mangroves play a critical role in buffering those impacts, while also let's not forget that they're one of the most productive ecosystems in the world and have a remarkable ability to sequester carbon or carbon dioxide, not just converting it into biomass in trees, but actually binding it up in the sediments, and they actually build up sediments over time, which is then rich with carbon, which has come out of the atmosphere. And in return, they give us oxygen, which we need to breathe. They help purify and clean water, so give us water quality improvements and provide a lot of valuable habitat for aquatic or marine species and fish and so on. And the people, there's a long history in the region of fishing and that connection with the sea in the UAE and also in Oman next door. And mangroves are just an integral part of that sort of lifestyle and that tradition and history as well.
Absolutely. It's amazing how much nature-based solutions have this ripple effect within an ecosystem, but also with the communities that live around it. Now, the title of this conference, is the road to the UAE, the road to COP28. And my question I'd like to start off with Cindy is, how can we ensure that climate investment involves both local content and local collaboration? What is your view on that?
Well, I don't really think it's a choice. I think it's kind of essential across the board, really, in the work that RSK does in the region. In our impact assessment, local content is really just a very significant mitigation, not just here, really, and internationally, all of our projects. So the people on the ground know the problems all too well, especially in the developing countries, because they're the ones that are very impacted by it. And they're really going to be the ones that turn the words into action, I think. And unfortunately, I think often there's been a lot of words. It would be kind of pointless to swoop in with all the international experts without getting the local content as like an integral part of the implementing it, because they're the ones that need to make sure that it's working in that local area. So that alignment and collaboration and what we call the social license to operate is really essential.
Yeah, Walid, if you allow me, just want to elaborate more on this subject. We call it in-country value or local content, but this is really important. And I think setting up, manufacturing, focusing on the needs of those investments, would definitely having the local content, setting up local manufacturing to support the projects, the new projects to produce clean new energies like green hydrogen or wind or solar in the region itself, will definitely contribute to achieving the zero emission. Because just shipping the stuff from around the world to for a project that is next door is again gonna contribute to the CO2 emission by consuming more energy. So I think it's really important for governments and for private sector and also for foreign investors to try to focus in the local content element, whether it's the developments of workforce, the local workforce. I think that's really important. Also focusing on the goods and services within the same country or just next door, the same way Tom has described, the nature-based solution. I think he came up with a number of ideas on that. That's how you contribute to the efficiencies. And I think local content will definitely contribute to the reduction of energy consumed to deliver, whether it's human resources or deliver machines and so on. So you have really to focus on the local content, and whether it's assets or goods, services, and workforce.
Thank you, Abdurrahman. Now, Antonios, we heard about this capacity building perspective. So what is on your view in terms of what needs to be done for this road to COP28?
What needs to be done? There are a million things that need to be done. Can you hear me? Am I frozen?
No, we can see you.
Okay, great. Sorry, there's some problem with my laptop. Right. So there are so many things that need to be done, but as I was saying at the beginning, I'm very positive about the outlook over the coming years, simply because, to me at least, and working for so many years in as a sustainability consultant and that sector, climate action has not always been the top of the agenda, but finally, after many, many years, and I don't have to explain it to you, Walid, or Tom, or Abdurrahman, or Cindy, it's finally at the top of the agenda, right? And at least I'm glad about that. So you can see even events like ADIPEC, for example, that is about oil, it's about fossil fuels, are themed around sustainability. So that's very, very positive to my mind, at least. We're going to be seeing a lot more as we move forward, and we're going to be seeing a lot more, as I said, announcements from governments and from the UAE, especially now that we move towards COP. And I was actually in contact with the team from COP28 very recently, and they have been, they've been playing with a very interesting concept, which is they don't want to celebrate COP28 only those 2 weeks, but they want to celebrate more the green zone. And to do that, and for those, just to explain very briefly in 10 seconds, COPs have a blue and a green zone, blue being the political, green being everything else. They want to have a year long of events where, starting from 1st of January 2023, leading up to COP28, they celebrate, they speak, they educate, they work with academia like NYU Abu Dhabi or other universities in the UAE, with the private sector, with the government, to launch initiatives, to educate people, and to actually try and provide the tools to people to understand a little bit more what a climate action is, how can everybody contribute. And because we are surrounded, and I'll close with that, with so many negative news, sometimes myself I'm feeling overwhelmed to even keep up with what's happening around. It's really crucial to provide some simple messages to people, explain what needs to be done, and in the end of the day, approach all of that with a positive mindset. If you don't have a positive mindset, you can easily become what I recently found out, it's a new type of people, which is called climate doomers. And actually, reading the article, I found out that if we all become climate doomers, we get desperate, we're going to accelerate the effects of climate change. And this is exactly the opposite of what we're trying to do. So I'm always trying to, whenever I speak to anybody, trying to provide a positive note, because we have the tools. We just need to deploy them in a much faster approach than we do it now, with nature-based solutions, with investment, with all of that. And it needs to happen now, and it needs to happen in a much greater pace. That's the message.
Thank you, Antonios. And I think we can all agree that we definitely are not a panel of climate doomers, but a climate optimists. And there's been some fantastic news being shared on this panel, which definitely gives me hope in what is to come. I'm afraid we're out of time, so I'm going to thank my fantastic panel and audience for joining us today. I'm sure you'll agree that this was an invigorating conversation with a lot of many different viewpoints, whether it's from Tom, through his nature-based solutions, and everyone else's contributions on the other aspects and how we can tackle these challenges. You can tune into a recording of our session later on RSK's website, and please share on social media using the hashtag #ActOnESG. and also on the social channels, Instagram at the RSK Group, LinkedIn RSK Group, Facebook RSK Group, and as you guessed it, Twitter at RSK Group. So on this note, I'm going to wish you all a wonderful rest of your day or evening, and we'll continue on social media. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to my panel.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Walid,
Pleasure.
everyone.